Akira Kurosawa's Throne of Blood turns Shakespeare's Macbeth into a samurai nightmare, a world of spirits, cursed destinies, and warriors haunted by ghosts. Its windswept fog, black and white shadows, and Toshiro Mifune's feral intensity became the blueprint for Kurosawa Mode in Ghost of Tsushima, and that same haunted aesthetic is returning in Ghost of Yōtei. But is this 1957 classic still terrifying in its power, or too theatrical for modern eyes? All right, here on Nerd Legion, we are pulling the old switcheroo. Isn't that right, DoA? So you might be used to this show.
Sure.
Talking about sci-fi and fantasy, as in new releases, films, TV shows, sci-fi fantasy, as well as our ongoing watch every fantasy film of the 1980s series. But we're doing something completely different now. And there is, in fact, hopefully a good reason for this. And that is the launch of the game Ghost of Yōtei on October 2nd. And why we're doing this is because part of the Last Free Nation Network, we are going to start creating general gaming content, including a review of that game that DoA and I will be working on alongside some other people. And that means that you guys should go on over and click on the general gaming channel below and go ahead and subscribe to that. We did a Wildgate impressions when we were in their closed beta, which was a lot of fun. But we've got other content coming for that channel as well. And in the lead up to Ghost of Yōtei, we thought it would be fun to visit some of the films and anime series that have been direct inspirations for Ghost of Tsushima first and now Ghost of Yōtei. So if you are interested in the game, but you haven't seen a lot of classic samurai cinema, now is the time to indulge in that in the weeks before launch.
Yeah, and we're not giving up on the old stuff, obviously. We're going to go back to the 80s fantasy movies. We're going to go back to having to endure whatever new Marvel stuff comes out, Star Wars stuff anyway. But you know, I thought this would be fun. And, you know, this is a really new direction for us, talking about video games. This isn't really what we're known for, you know, but we thought we'd give it a try and see if people are into hearing Monty and DoA talk about video games. You know, it's out there. It's out there. But I hope people will be open and willing to give us a chance, you know?
That's right. So we are going to be looking at Ghost of Yōtei as part of this content series. What you can look forward to is weekly episodes of Nerd Legion. We're starting here with the Kurosawa film Throne of Blood. So that's where we're going to kick things off. But beyond that, we are then going to be doing 13 Assassins, because there is also a Miike. Whoa.
Whoa.
Can't talk.
I couldn't pronounce it either. I just say Mikey.
Mode, the director, Miike, in the game. So we're going to be doing 13 Assassins. There is also going to be a Watanabe mode from the director of Cowboy Bebop and Samurai Champloo. So we are going to be looking at all of Samurai Champloo in 2 weeks. And the Watanabe mode contains lo-fi beats, like Samurai Champloo. So famously, they did the period samurai plus hip-hop lo-fi crossover within that series. So we'll be revisiting that. We're going to be focusing on Lady Snowblood, very iconic Japanese film from the 70s that focuses on a female lead getting revenge, which is what the plot of Ghost of Yōtei is about. It was also one of the key inspirations for Kill Bill for Quentin Tarantino. And we also are going to be looking at Lone Wolf and Cub, Sword of Vengeance. That's the first Lone Wolf and Cub film from the famous manga series, but that is the wandering samurai Ronin archetype film. So the order we'll be doing is Throne of Blood, 13 Assassins, Lady Snowblood, first 13 episodes of Samurai Champloo, second 13 episodes of Samurai Champloo, and then Lone Wolf and Cub. This will take us right into the Ghost of Yōtei release. And at that time, we'll be dropping some content, including the review of the game over on the gaming channel. We will probably be doing some more film content on this channel, where once we can play through the game, we'll cite the direct influences, particularly from these movies that we've watched. I am going to Hokkaido to climb Mount Yotei next week. I will then be doing
Talk about dedication.
That's right. On the gaming channel, I'll be doing a historical accuracy of Ghost of Yōtei video, and we might do some stuff with Ainu mythology there as well. And then on my cooking content on Continue Cooking, I'll be cooking recipes from Hokkaido, and there is a cooking mechanic in the game, so we'll be doing like Hokkaido cuisine and Ainu cuisine. So we got a lot coming for you around the release. So if you're excited about Ghost of Yōtei or intrigued about Japanese cinema and history, maybe you're not even into the game, because there's going to be a lot of other stuff that you might be interested to that is interesting because the game is set in an interesting setting. So there you go.
I mean, it's an ambitious arc in our show here, but I'm excited. I haven't, especially like, I haven't seen a lot of this stuff sometimes ever, like Lady Snowblood, never seen. I haven't seen a lot of Kurosawa stuff for a long time, probably since college. Which wasn't that long ago, really. I mean, it's not really all that long ago, but it just feels a little bit long ago sometimes. Anyway, it's been a while since I watched Kurosawa. Samurai Champloo as well.
It was 20 years ago, by the way.
It was not 20. It was 20 years ago. Well, I graduated less than 20 years ago. It was 19 years ago.
Okay, calm down, coping Unk over here.
And, you know, things have only gotten
Unk
better.
is huffing the copium. It was 20 years ago, Noah.
It's a long time ago. Either way, I'm looking forward to revisiting like Samurai Champloo and all that. You know, obviously everyone out there right now is going, wasn't as good as Cowboy Bebop. And we know that. We know that it wasn't objectively as strong as Cowboy Bebop. That show is near perfect. But I think Samurai Champloo was a good show too. So I'm looking forward to watching that again. And yeah, it'll just be fun. It'll be a marathon, but it'll be a good time.
Yeah, and it really does play in because the Sucker Punch Productions, who've made Ghost of Yōtei, have included, they have the Kurosawa mode in Ghost of Tsushima. They are adding the Miike and Watanabe modes into Ghost of Yōtei. So there's a lot here that is literally directly influenced. And if you played the first game of Ghost of Tsushima, you know how much they have modeled the game around the kind of shots of old samurai films. You know, it feels very much an homage to that, both in terms of story, terms of what I would call cinematography. It's definitely one of the most beautiful games of the last 10 years, and just very deliberate framing. So let's talk about Throne of Blood. Now, there are a lot of Kurosawa samurai epics, but it was important to select Throne of Blood in particular because, first off, Kurosawa mode in the game is a black and white mode with film grain and extra wind. And in this, in Throne of Blood, you will see it is a black and white movie with film grain and extra wind. It's very
sometimes
windy.
Some rain too. Yeah,
very windy. Lots of fog, lots of atmospheric effects, but huge amounts of wind. You can see that right off the start in some of the castle scenes, the enormous amount of wind that is in these shots. So Kurosawa, very famous for this. And an interesting fact about the Kurosawa mode is it's not just like a black and white filter with film grain DoA. Sucker Punch very deliberately looked at black and white samurai movies and picked different times of day that were shot in those films, and then saw how like bright the whites are and blacks the black were, so they could adjust it to the game day-night cycle within Ghost of Tsushima.
Cool. I like
and so it would look like, you know, proper amounts of saturation for a night scene from a Kurosawa black and white movie. So it's not just a simple, let's take away the color.
Filter.
Filter. It's actually more than that, which is very cool.
Neat. That's awesome. I don't know. I'll say right away, I didn't play the first game. I just don't play a ton of console games in general right now. It's just difficult for me timing wise and just, you know, toddler wise. So I've kind of moved away from consoles for a little bit, but I still have a PS5. So I still have the ability to play this game when it comes out. So I will. Otherwise,
I think it'll be good to have a perspective of somebody who didn't play the first game on this game, because the games are not connected in terms of story. If you guys didn't play Ghost of Tsushima, like DoA, you should be aware that Ghost of Tsushima takes place in an entirely different location, the island of Tsushima, which is between Japan and Korea. It takes place in the 1200s, which is the Mongol invasion of Tsushima. The coming game, Ghost of Yōtei, takes place very far away in Hokkaido, the northernmost island of Japan, and is set in 1603, which is the beginning of the Tokugawa shogunate. So they're not the same characters, hundreds of years apart, many kilometers / miles separate from each other. So they will be entirely separate experiences. So if you want to jump into Ghost of Yōtei, you absolutely can, and you will be missing probably next to nothing.
Cool. I mean, that's good news. It wasn't for lack of wanting to. It just didn't work out. So we'll see how it goes. I would say I'm pretty good at video games in general, obviously, but the third person action games, for some reason, like on console, have just never felt like super comfortable for me to play. So this is going to be like the moment where I'm like, all right, I'm going to play this game. If I can do this, then I can play all the Souls-likes. I can do all that. I'm finally going to learn how to play the third-person action games on console. I've never liked it
system
before.
And combat in Ghost of Tsushima is excellent and will most likely be excellent in Ghost of Yōtei as well.
Right.
It's certainly one of the strengths. All right, so let's talk about Throne of Blood. So Throne of Blood is, I would say, compared to some of the other films that Kurosawa has made, like, we didn't pick Ran here, which is his 3-hour 1985. That's in color, so it wouldn't have even been appropriate. But that's his adaptation of King Lear. And for Kurosawa, one of the interesting things about this post-war period in Japanese cinema and American cinema as well was there was a huge amount of crossover between the directors of Westerns and the directors of these samurai epics. Yeah. And Kurosawa has said that John Ford, the famous Western director, was one of his most prominent influences. And similarly, Seven Samurai was then adapted in American cinema to become The Magnificent Seven, very famous Western movie. And then also Yojimbo, Kurosawa's classic, was taken and became Fistful of Dollars with Clint Eastwood. So there is a huge push for and like cross-pollination. And you see that here because what happens is that Kurosawa is actually taking Shakespeare, because Throne of Blood is a Macbeth adaptation. He did a few different adaptations of Shakespeare in his career, one of which is Throne of Blood, one of which is Ran, which is the King Lear adaptation that we talked about. And then he did a non-samurai one, The Bad Sleep Well, which is a sort of Hamlet adaptation. So there's a lot of interest, I think, among Japanese artists post Meiji Restoration in Shakespeare. And this then plays into this film directly. And what's interesting about this is that we have many of the same kind of characters from Macbeth, like most prominently, you have the king figure, you have the lesser noble figure, which is Macbeth, you have Lady Macbeth, you have Banquo and Miki in this film. So there's enough analogs, but where it really differs is in the presentation of the story, where notably Shakespeare famously dialogue/monologue soliloquy heavy. This film, very little dialogue.
So it's got one significant monologue, I would say, kind of towards the end. But the thing that jumped out at me, Shakespeare-wise, is that I love how he uses like the commoners for exposition, which is what we get in this too, where it's like the guards by the gate are just talking about what's going on. Yep. And we get a little look at the commonality when we're kind of inundated with the royalty, so to speak, and they're also the ones that, like I said, give us that exposition. So it does all feel very Shakespearean, by design. It does all feel very play-like by design, and also because it's the 1950s, and we're not too far removed from entertainment being like only stage plays, So it's still, I feel like, that transitionary period in cinema, not just in Japan, but kind of worldwide, where people are still trying to figure out what the difference between a film and a stage play is, and this has a little bit of the best of both. It's got really great kind of, I think, just like stage play direction in a lot of the dialogue scenes and all that. And then it's just got, incredible cinematography, scene after incredible cinematography with the landscapes, with the fog scenes, all that kind of stuff. So he really kind of takes the best, I think, from the emerging sort of like style of just emerging fundamentals of filmmaking that are being developed at the time, and then just kind of the best from stage plays and puts them together. It's really, really interesting to watch.
Yeah, and the blending of one of the most famous plays in the Western theatrical canon with Noh theater, which is the most time worn and revered Japanese theater, is very interesting in Throne of Blood. And I think this movie was not super well reviewed when it came out. And I think if you were an American or Western critic in the 1950s, this probably, you were not exposed to a lot of different forms of theater from around the world. But I think if you understand Noh theater, this is a really ingenious way for Kurosawa to adapt a Western story into the parameters of Noh theater. And I think for Westerners, this comes across as being kind of weird because it's highly stylized. And you have to understand that Noh theater has a specific canon of plays that it works with, and that the stage is always the same. Like the stage layout and everything is identical for all Noh plays, and that there are certain kind of stock characters, and everybody wears masks in Noh theater. So when we see a lot of the scenes where there would normally be a lot of dialogue in Shakespeare or a soliloquy, what we're seeing instead, particularly between the characters that represent Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, is that the characters often have very frozen faces, and there are very long periods, and not just frozen neutral faces like we see the Lady Macbeth character here, but also Asaji is her name in this, but Washizu, who's Toshiro Mifune's character, who is supposed to be Macbeth, he will have this grimace and he'll just be holding his face like that.
It's amazing.
And what
he's very talented at that expression. I feel like that's the same one I kind of do too. Now that we're potty training my toddler and she doesn't quite make it, I'm just like, it's okay.
So I think this might be weird for people, but it's important to remember that what he's trying to do is mimic a Noh mask. During that time, and Noh doesn't have a lot of dialogue. So where this ties into Ghost of Yōtei, which we're waiting to play, but we assume from Ghost of Tsushima, is that a lot of Japanese theater and cinema gives long static shots and gives moments for the emotion or the moment to kind of breathe. And especially one of my favorite things about Ghost of Tsushima is whenever you finish a quest in the game, Jin, the main character, will kind of hit a pose afterwards, and then it will just freeze on that pose, and he'll be standing there looking out at the landscape or taking a nap on the ground leaning against his horse, and it gives you this moment of repose and the moment to kind of let the impact of the quest percolate in your mind. And so that's one of the things that they definitely pulled from this style of cinema, and it goes back to the 1950s and hundreds of years earlier in Noh theater. And
it'll feel slow to people that aren't familiar with it. It's I even felt it a little bit where I was like, okay, they're riding through the fog. I get it. They ride up and they turn their horses and they ride back in the fog. Same thing repeated 15 times or something like that. I'm like, I get it. So I even felt it when I was watching it earlier today, where I was like, oh, this does feel slow from time to time. They do it for all the reasons you're talking about, but for a modern film watching audience, there will be points that are a little bit tricky to get through. They are worth it to get through, obviously, but it does feel slow from time to time, and then that is just a symptom of the style and a symptom of the times. And I mean, American movies during this time period have a similar pace. Oh yes, in a lot of ways.
So this was all feeding into each other. Like when we talk about Kurosawa being a fan of John Ford, the director John Ford in Westerns, it's kind of the same things that we're seeing in a lot of these movies. These directors were all watching each other very actively and learning a lot in what was still a pretty early era of film with sound, coming out of the silent film era. And if you think about it, A Fistful of Dollars, the trilogy there, So Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, has many of these same kind of shots, which are static shots that go for a really long time that try and encompass the landscape and frame things really beautifully. And I think, that's one of the strengths of Kurosawa, and one of the things that Sucker Punch has pulled into the Ghost series is that you get these incredible long shots, and these incredible use of contrast, and later on color, right? Not in this particular movie, but the black and white contrast is so beautiful to look at in this film. When we see Washizu entering the forest castle and kind of taking it over, all his samurai and retainers with the black banners going in amongst his former lords, like white flags, and the weeping women for the coffin and all of their, white robes, is just unbelievably beautiful in this film. And the way he uses movement of the mist and the wind to tear at the flags and show the waving trees is just fantastic. I mean, I don't, you say you find it a little like it takes a while to, I find every scene in this movie just to be incredibly beautiful. So I don't really care that it's taking a long time because it's so well framed.
Yeah, I mean, like, maybe it is just the amount of time I'm able to pay attention to something has declined over the years too. But
I think it's true of all of us, really.
Yeah, it is. It's just some of those scenes just feel like they drag on a little bit too long, and I know that's like sacrilegious to say when it comes to like Kurosawa, but again, if you're a modern filmmaking audience, you're not going to be used to it. And I'll say the same thing I did a few minutes ago. It's worth it to sit through it, and it is worth it to try to take it in and enjoy it as much as you can. But you probably will feel it a little bit, and I definitely did, and that's just how it is. If you feel something, you feel something, right? So what it made me want to do though is watch more Kurosawa again, where I was like, oh, that's right. Yeah. These movies are really good. Like now I want to sort of experience how his filmmaking evolves over time again, because like I said, it's been close to 20 years, if not more than 20 years since I've seen a lot of these movies. So it's kind of like watching them for the first time. There were scenes in this that happened. I was like, oh yeah, I remember this now. Like especially the arrowed scene, to use a Homestar Runner phrase at the end, which Homestar Runner and Kurosawa often mention in the same breath. But that jumped out at me to be like, oh yeah, I remember this and how insane it was. So there were moments where I recalled seeing it before, but for the most part, it was kind of watching it again for the first time, which was fun. I like watching things for the first time.
Yeah, and I also I love Throne of Blood. It is among my favorite Kurosawa films, but I personally prefer Seven Samurai and Yojimbo to this movie. But I mean, there's so many different excellent Kurosawa epics that you can pick from if you guys are interested in diving into more of this. But this one is very, very influential. So one of the things that I really enjoyed about this movie, and I did some research on this because I've seen this movie many times, but I didn't realize the implications of some of the symbolism within Throne of Blood. When we first see Washizu, Macbeth, he's in the forest, right, about to meet the witch, and he has the banner on his back that is a black banner with a white centipede on it. And I was wondering what the centipede symbolized in Japanese culture and what the centipede symbolizes in Japan, and it was used by samurai during this period, it's a symbol of strength. So the centipede is a symbol of strength and relentlessness. And also they thought of it this way because the centipede can only move forward and is often very dominant over other insects. So it was actually a very powerful symbol. And they take this symbol and they do really interesting things with it because we see it moving forward in the banner at first, but in subsequent scenes, he still has the centipede, but it's embroidered in a spiral on his robe as if it's confused about which direction to go. And this symbolism of him spinning is repeated constantly in his own movements. In the banquet scene, he's spinning around in his own confusion. When he later revisits the forest to find the witch, his horse is constantly spinning in circles in these scenes. And what I find so cool about this symbolism is that he's a powerful figure, but ultimately the theme that his destiny is inescapable is what's so interesting, because Destiny can only move forward. He can only go forward like the Centipede. And even if he is confused or trying to escape, the destiny is inevitable in the end, right? And I think the symbolism of him being the Centipede, now that I have the context of what the Japanese culturally thought about it during the period, is just fucking cool.
I was kind of wondering about the centipede motif as well. That's interesting. I know centipedes in real life can walk backwards, but I could see how, like, at the time they'd be a symbol of only moving forward, because you don't really see centipedes walk backwards too often, you know? At least I haven't.
So I just think that's such an interesting concept. And like, there are examples of this of samurai using this in the period. And there's also a Japanese legend of a monster called Omukade, and it is a giant centipede monster that can actually hunt dragons. So it's also this monster that kills these very powerful beings, which is exactly what he does in this as well. So there's a lot of really cool stuff with the centipede that has depth and symbolism, and I just love the way that he changes it into the spiral design as we start to see his character spinning out of control.
That is pretty neat. I mean, that and the first indication you kind of have of that is when they get lost in the fog going through the forest, and they're riding up to the camera and they're turning their horses around and riding back away. They're spinning already. Yeah, that's true.
So, I mean, this is what Kurosawa is really good at, though, is literary levels of symbolism and reflecting the symbolism within the actions of the characters, which is very theatrical, right? But it works extremely well. And to be so bold as to take something like Shakespeare and then infuse it with your own culture's symbolism and then kind of layer other stuff artistically on top of that is a very bold choice. And it works really, really well. So I love that part of this film. And I think it does so much to give you insight into the themes of the inescapable destiny that this character is embroiled in, as well as his psychological mindset, which is deteriorating.
Yeah, it's kind of the age-old question of, like, if you didn't know it was your destiny, would you take actions to fulfill it? You know, it's like the scene in The Matrix, right, where she says, "Don't worry about the vase," and he says, "What vase?" and turns around to look for it, and that's what bumps the vase onto the floor. And of course, she's like, you know, would you have broken it if I hadn't said anything? And so it's that kind of thing, right? Where it's like, if they had never met the spirit in the forest that told them destiny, would they have taken, you know, all those kind of extreme, well, not kind of, extremely extreme actions to, you know, murder the warlord and to, you know, go after his friend and try to, you know, assassinate his friend and all that kind of stuff. And so I was kind of mulling over that, where I'm like, is the intent supposed to be that destiny is inescapable, or is the intent that, like, you know, you make your own destiny? And although he was told these things, you know, he could have just decided to not listen to his wife and not kill the guy staying in his house. You know, he could have just, you know, he could, I mean, to be fair though, she kind of set things in motion herself without even, you know, having him agree to it with the sake stuff, which I was like, hey, come on, you know, you're putting him in a really rough situation here. But yeah, that's I think the
question is, does it become a self-fulfilling prophecy? And yes, I think the answer to that in both this film and Macbeth, the one I lean towards, is no, because we are dealing with supernatural beings like the witch in this case, and also because in a way, like you can see he's resisting it, but what's irresistible is the logic that Lady Macbeth / Asaji is offering him, which is that if he found out from Banquo / Miki that that they had went and this prophecy was there, wouldn't the Lord view him as a threat and try and kill him? And couldn't this all be a ruse in order to get him killed? So his only possible action to take is that he must kill the Lord. And also, I think later on, the prophecy says that Mickey's son will be the next lord of the castle, but the information he has at the time is that he is going to have a son, and therefore he probably believes that the prophecy could be wrong because it's now his own heir. He would assume it would be his own heir that will take over as Lord of the Castle.
Yeah, there's that.
But it does raise these questions for sure. And I think it just depends on how you interpret the film.
I like to think of it as being a little bit more open-ended, where you can look at it as, well, there's a story about supernatural occurrences, and so, we're locked into the, effects of something greater than mankind's will, right? But at the same time, I think one of the values, one of the primary values of reading things and watching things is to, think about the application to, human life, right? To our own life on this planet, right? And so, do you have to do something just because you were told you were meant to do it, or you feel that it's your destiny, right? I think a lot of people get caught up in things that they think they're destined to do, and then it causes them to take a lot of necessary steps and put themselves through a lot of grief they wouldn't have otherwise needed to. So I feel like there's a little bit of a lesson in there too, because it's not a happy story. It's a tragedy, essentially, right? It's a dramatic tragedy. We're not supposed to be like these people. We're supposed to learn from, their mistakes if we're to learn anything, So that was my takeaway, where it's kind of open-ended. In a strict story sense, yeah, supernatural occurrence, nothing you can do. In a more philosophical sense, is this something we should be thinking about, as we move through our own, time on this planet?
Indeed.
There you go.
What other aspects of this movie did you enjoy as someone who hadn't seen it in a very long time, DoA?
Well, I realized there was a really funny Star Wars connection.
Oh God!
Because the guys, Washizu's wife's name was Asaji, and I was like, Asaji? That sounds a lot like Asajj, as in the Asajj Ventress from like the Clone Wars cartoon and all that. I'm like, I wonder if. So I looked it up, and indeed, that character is named after her, after that character from Throne of Blood. There was a, I've got it, I've up, so I don't forget the name. There was a person at LucasArts named Leland Shee, apparently, who named her after the character from Throne of Blood. So there you go. There's your Star Wars connection for the week. I don't think I have a World of Warcraft one this time around, which I feel like I usually do with most films, but this one's just Star Wars this time around. So there you go.
Well,
Asajj Ventress.
There's obviously
the Asajj part is from Throne of Blood.
We've talked about this on other episodes, and if you dare to watch it, one of our Acolyte episodes talks in depth about Kurosawa references.
I mean, there's all the obvious Kurosawa Star Wars stuff. Like there's the stuff that everybody talks about, right? But I thought it was funny that there was a very specific character in an animated Star Wars thing that was named directly from a character in this movie. I don't think a lot of people know that. I know someone who's a big fan of that character. I'm going to ask him if he knows that. I wonder if he does. I wonder if he's ever seen Kurosawa.
Yeah. So, like, obviously, we know George Lucas has said, "I was inspired by Kurosawa samurai films."
Yeah, but that's like story structure stuff, not like not individual
in the
character
Acolyte's
names.
case, it was literally a visual reference to Sanjuro, but sure.
Oh, sure. Well, the Acolyte exists. Yeah, it does. It did have great fight scenes. I'll give it that. But that's all I'll give it.
Everything else was trash. Anything else stand out to you besides a Star Wars connection? Another one?
That's a great question. I mean, no, I just think I really was amazed how good like landscape shots looked, especially in black and white. That's something I think is notoriously difficult to do well without color. And obviously they were working with what they had at the time. They didn't have access to, or easy access to color at that time. So yeah, the color balance, the black and white balance is just so incredible in a lot of those scenes. It really was mind blowing seeing a lot of that stuff. I think motion does help. That's an interesting point I hadn't thought about, where it's not just the composition, it's also the introduction of motion that creates more contrast between the black and white gradients, and that does help you sort of differentiate things, because the biggest problem with black and white is that it just all sort of flows together sometimes if it's not done well. But this movie did it great. And then I think the scene everybody talks about with this movie, which is the ending scene where our main character gets arrowed by a lot of like real life arrows flying through the air next to his face, which is, I was watching that scene. I was like, are they actually shooting arrows at him again? I couldn't remember. I was like, is some of that on strings, like, or do they have like little arrow firing machines like you'd see now where you could do it accurately? And but no, we talked about this before the show, and yeah, those are actual just like people hanging out shooting arrows at him.
So
it's crazy.
The scene at the end where Washizu is murdered by his own men is, I think, one of the most famous scenes in Kurosawa, because Toshiro Mifune is a massive movie star in Japan at this period. He is the star of many Kurosawa films. And the acting that you see in the scene where he is killed is not really acting, because they're really shooting arrows at him. And the first time I saw this movie many years ago, I was wondering how they did it. And there's actually an interview with the prop master where he discusses this and how they shot this scene. There are pictures of them using men with bows and arrows on a scaffold in the middle of the courtyard of the castle, shooting arrows at Toshiro Mifune. So the way they did this, the way they do the arrow scene, is the arrows that hit Toshiro Mifune were on wires attached to his armor. There were wooden boards placed under his armor, and they had arrows with like thick phonograph needle tips that were then shot on the wires to hit his armor. So they were shooting those at him, but he did have a layer of protection in the armor and the boards. But the other arrows, the ones that are hitting the castle, are actually just real arrows that they're shooting at him. And they probably shoot 100 arrows at him during this scene. And his acting, his facial expressions are absolutely incredible during this, because he's probably terrified of getting hit by real arrows. They did use some tricks, like they used a telephoto lens so that they could shoot the arrows further away from him, but it would appear closer to him if they shot the arrows. But as you can see during this scene, he is reaching out at times and breaking the shafts of the arrows with his hands. So they're close enough. And
within an arm's length.
Yeah, within arm's length.
That's pretty close.
So he apparently, through his movements, was directing where and when to fire the arrow so they wouldn't hit him. They did all of these shots allegedly in one day. And then, as the prop master tells it, Toshiro Mifune then asked Kurosawa, are we going to do this tomorrow? He said no. And then he said, okay, let's drink. And then they all went out and got super drunk because he...
Can't blame him after a day like that.
Scene.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's it really is something else. I have watched in the past things about how you actually shoot arrows at people in movies. I was just curious one day. I was like, how do they do that kind of stuff? And so it is amazing that like sometimes you just shoot the arrow, And earlier in the movie when the two characters, the son of the leader and the one of the loyal guys, I can't remember the name right now, are outside the gates, and Miki doesn't let them in. Mickey doesn't let them in. They're shooting arrows at them, and like a lot of those arrows come pretty close to those horses and stuff too. And I was like, wow, those are some real arrows going close to some real people there. But it was a different time in filmmaking. Safety wasn't exactly priority one, I'm guessing.
Look, there were only so many ways to do special effects, and many of them were dangerous.
Yep. But they all look great.
Yeah, it looks amazing. And I think once you have watched Throne of Blood and you see that scene, it will stay with you forever. It comes across incredibly well, and it is so iconic, both from the beauty of the shots, the intensity of the rain of arrows, and Mifune's acting. The combination is just sublime. It is one of the most memorable death scenes in cinema, I think.
He's just great. Like Toshiro Mifune is just every single. We talk about his facial expressions a lot, right? But like he really does. he really does kind of like lean into the emotion of every single scene and is so expressive with how he, communicates that. And it doesn't come, the most important thing is it never comes across as like cheesy or hammed up. It just comes across as very theatrical. It seems appropriate for the context, and it just works really, really well.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know that all of these actors at the time were coming from various Japanese theatrical traditions.
Of course.
And so some of the other stuff that they're doing that might seem weird would have seemed pretty normal to a Japanese audience who had been accustomed to hundreds of years of Japanese theater in these styles.
Right. It's, again, like we talked about earlier, during the transition from, everything's a stage play to what can we do on film with sets that we couldn't do with just a stage, and that doesn't just include shots. That also includes, what do you do as an actor, right? Theater movements have to be very big. All the emotions have to be very big because you got people sitting way in the back who need to be, told what's going on, right? Where when you have a camera right in someone's face, then you can do, very subtle things, right? Because everybody gets to be right next to the actor, right? So, it seems like a no-brainer to us now, right? But at the time, people were still kind of figuring it out. What can we even do differently between stage acting and film acting, television acting? So it's cool to see that sort of like hybrid existing during this time period.
So I think some of the other ways in which Throne of Blood is likely to play into Ghost of Yōtei is that you literally just have, what was cool about Ghost of Tsushima is that you had this mythology that was building up around Jin Sakai as the ghost, the titular Ghost of Tsushima. He was this ninja-esque mythological force in the game. And if you guys have played it, you know that his legend was kind of growing among the Japanese people of Tsushima, as well as his enemies, the Mongols on the island, because he was this, larger than life, powerful figure who comes out of the darkness and slaughters dozens of Mongols at once from the shadows, right? And when we look at this, one of the striking features of Throne of Blood, and one of the reasons why we chose it, is because it does have supernatural elements. The witch is there within this. There is a sense that there is literally the theme of the force of destiny within this, right? As in the victories, the overwhelming, unlikely victories and defeats are preordained. And we have we have real ghosts within this. We have the ghost of Miki at the banquet scene. We have the ghost-like witch, which is, spinning yarn during the first scene in the hut in the spider forest. And so when we have these supernatural elements, that plays into, maybe not literally in Ghost of Tsushima, but this kind of mythology and mythologizing of these figures comes out within these games. And we already know that's going to be the case with Ghost of Yōtei, because we have these kind of larger than life six figures that Atsu, the main character, is hunting down within the game, as well as the way that the game works in these Ghost of is that the hero, the character you're playing, also becomes this like larger than life figure and this menacing mythological figure with demon masks and, crazy armor that is in itself intimidating.
Yeah, it's very cool. The funny thing is we talked about earlier at the show that earlier in the show, this was kind of a departure from the usual, but it really doesn't feel like that much of a departure from the 80s fantasy arc we've been on, because you have just a lot of the same things, I feel like, mostly because, the 80s fantasy tropes, the stuff that inspired Conan the Barbarian also, was part of this too, where you have, although this is Shakespeare, obviously, but you've got similar things. You've got, warriors fighting over control of a kingdom or a city, things like that. You've got very human military conflicts, but sort of sprinkled with supernatural forces that influence things one way or the other. That sort of framework is present in pretty much all fantasy. And so it's funny, like watching this doesn't feel like that big of a leap from what we've been doing lately, anyway.
Yeah. I mean, yes, this is fantastical. It is the equivalent of like period fantasy, right?
Yeah, for sure.
for samurai films to a certain degree, it is larger than life, does have the supernatural elements. And I think that's what's fun. And so we can see how Sucker Punch is drawing from these tropes and putting them within the game. Also, I will say that at least with Ghost of Tsushima's Legends system, the multiplayer system, there is the real element of demons and mythology that starts to come into play as well. So maybe there will be more mythological elements coming up in Ghost of Yōtei. We also know that from the trailers that Atsu is referred to as an onryo, which is a vengeful ghost, which is another aspect of Japanese mythology, which we also saw in Blue Eye Samurai, DoA. And we didn't,
Season 2 coming soon.
Yeah, 2026. We've already done, if you guys are curious, you can check out our show on Blue Eye Samurai. We both love that show. I was thinking about including it in this, but it came out in 2023, DoA, and Ghost of Yōtei was already very heavily in production at that time period.
Sure.
And so I can't say, Ghost of Yōtei was inspired by Blue Eye Samurai, right? But the thing about Blue Eye Samurai is that the overlap between that and Ghost of Yōtei is actually huge, because you have a female warrior protagonist who is on a quest for revenge, who is referred to as onryo, the same Japanese vengeful spirit, which are frequently female. So, this is basically, in Japan, the concept is that there is a ghost that is out for revenge for some thing that happened during life, and it can have really profound consequences where it causes famines or plagues or tragedies or the killing of nobility or important people. And to refer to an alive person like that, as we see with Mizu in Blue Eye Samurai, and then in the trailers, Atsu is also referred to as an onryo, because what we know about her is that she is the daughter of a swordsmith. Also, Mizu, not the daughter of a swordsmith, but her foster father
closely
is
affiliated in a parental way. Yeah, actually, there's a lot of.
It's very similar. Also... It's very similar. When I saw this, and they're like, she's referred to as the daughter of the swordsmith. We know her background story is that the Yotei 6, which are these 6 villains that you have to hunt down, like your bounty targets, basically, end up killing her family and her father. She is left for dead after being stabbed to a tree, and then later she is referred to when she's an adult. This is when she's a child. When she's an adult, you see her confronting one of the Yotei 6 in the trailers, and she is referred to as the daughter of the swordsmith and the onryo, which is the vengeful ghost. So let's just say extremely similar.
I mean,
I don't think it was inspired by Blue Eye Samurai. I think they arrived at the same story points, which are not illogical for Japanese mythology, but it is curious, the parallels.
Well, there's also another major parallel too, it sounds like. If it is the local sort of original inhabitants of Hokkaido versus the encroaching Japanese, that also is kind of similar to Blue-Eyed Samurai, where she's really kind of after the Europeans that have come and started messing with Japan, so there's even sort of the resistance of a foreign invader to a certain extent too. So there's seems like there's a lot of parallels actually between the show and this game. So who knows? It's impossible to say how much actual direct crossover there was in ideas, but it is interesting to see all the parallels. Now that I think about it. Yeah.
And they haven't revealed this yet as the time we're recording this, but to Doa's point, I suspect that Atsu, the main character, is actually Ainu. And
reasonable suspicion.
We know, a very strong suspicion. And the Ainu are the native people of Hokkaido. And what was happening during this period is that at the start of the Tokugawa shogunate, this was the kind of main island Japanese people's push into controlling Hokkaido, which means that they were subjugating the Ainu people. And so I suspect that the storyline is that you are actually Ainu, and that the enemies are the shogun's minions that are pushing northward in the Japanese islands. That's my suspicion.
Wait and see. We'll have to wait and see. I think, just based on what we've got so far information-wise, it seems like a pretty reasonable suspicion. But perhaps hit another parallel. We'll see. We'll see. Either way, we can enjoy both just fine. Yeah. But as far as Throne of Blood goes, I don't have a ton more to talk about. I really did love. As I was thinking about other kind of shots, I really love the shot where they at the beginning where they meet the witch in the hut, and then they the one wall blows out and they run out the back, and then they turn and they're surprised and the camera pulls back and the hut is gone, And I was like, well, that's kind of a neat little practical effect to do. And I was like, how did they do that? What I came up with, because they moved the camera in here, and it's clearly on a dolly, so they couldn't have moved the hut left to right. So I'm guessing they just moved it in there, went past, and then people picked up the hut and just moved backwards past where the camera was again, so that when they zoomed out, it had been moved essentially kind of like over the head of the camera, because you could do that, I think, really smoothly without having to break the dolly then. So, but it's a neat effect. It's a neat little sort of magic trick, in frame without any cuts. So I love that kind of thing, because I feel like you don't see that kind of thing in filmmaking today, because it's so easy to just do stuff with CG and all that, that you don't, there's no real need for trickery like that anymore. So it's always fun when it pops up in an older film like this.
Yeah.
That's the only other thing that jumped out.
We don't need technique or lighting or forethought anymore, because this all fix it in post. That's fine.
Right. Who needs to even write a good story? People just have it on their second monitor anyway. Who cares, right?
So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed Throne of Blood. It, like I said, is one of my all-time favorites. If you like this, check out Yojimbo, check out Seven Samurai, check out Ran, Hidden Fortress, some of these other Kurosawa samurai films that are very famous. We are going to continue on the samurai arc. We're going to flip forward pretty significantly, because we want to cover the Miike mode from the director Miike, who did the very famous 13 Assassins movie, which is a much more recent film from 2010, but very, very famous and lauded. And the Miike mode, for those of you wondering, in Ghost of Yōtei, what it does is it puts the camera closer to your character Atsu during action sequences and increases blood and mud splatter.
That sounds like a very difficult way to play the game, especially being a third-person action game in close. I don't know. I want it chill.
So we'll cut in some examples of that that have been teased so far by Sucker Punch, but we will be looking at 13 Assassins next week, which is Miike's most popular movie. If you love exploring the films that shape today's games, hit subscribe and tap the new hype button to support Nerd Legion. Every like and comment helps us bring more Ghost of Yōtei inspiration straight to you.